All right, Alexander, let's talk about more fake news from the Washington Post that has now been admitted to have been fake news by the Washington Post. 2 months removed, 2 months after the fact, the Washington Post and the fake news mainstream media have come clean, kind of admitted that they made up a BS story about what Trump had told Francis Watson, the chief investigator with the Georgia Secretary of State's office. So they made up a story that Trump had contacted Francis Watson, and I'm going to get this right because unlike the Washington Post, we're going to report facts, and I want to make sure the quotes are correct. On January 9th, the Washington Post reported that Trump told Watson, the chief investigator with the Georgia Secretary of State's office, to, and I quote, he told her to, told him, her, told him to, quote, find the fraud he claims happened during the 2020 U.S. election, and that if she did, she'd be, quote, a national hero. That is what the Post reported. Now we have a recording of the call, which reveals that Trump did not say that. And I'm going to read you exactly what Trump said. Quote, instead, Trump urged the investigator to scrutinize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, asserting she would find dishonesty there. That's what the retraction reads. With Trump adding that she had, quote, the most important job in the country right now. So that's what Trump said. The most important job in the country right now, the Washington Post said that Trump told her she would be a hero. When Trump told her to investigate, to scrutinize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia, the Washington Post reported that Trump had told her to, quote, find the fraud, quote, find the votes. Pure lies. Now we have a complete retraction from the Washington Post. And you know why we have this? This is the best part about this. They thought, the Washington Post, the real story here is that the Washington Post thought, and all of the fake news mainstream media thought that they would use their typical anonymous sources, these anonymous sources that are floating around, they always have these anonymous sources. These anonymous sources, they were going to use them and report this BS story, and there was no recording. There was nothing there. There was no evidence of this. But what do we have? We have an audio file that was found in the computer's trash folder. And now we have what Trump actually said during that audio call, and we have all of these BS mainstream media channels retracting their stories, starting with the Washington Post. 2 months removed, but it's the same old story, Alexander. They do this time and time and time again, whether it's Iraq WMDs or whether it's Russiagate or whether it's Syrian chemical weapons, other false flags, Ukraine gate, you name it. They do this time and time again. They get these anonymous sources, all the fake news mainstream media, they throttle these stories all over the place. They get big tech to make these stories trend. And then eventually 2 months, 3 months, 2 years down the line, we find out that they were complete BS. What do you make of this story?
Well, absolutely. Now, can I just make a few quick points in addition to all the points you've made? Firstly, the Washington Post, as you correctly said, misquoted. I mean, they didn't just misquote. They completely mischaracterized the entire discussion between Donald Trump and Francis Watson. I mean, they made out, in effect, that Donald Trump was trying to induce and incite Francis Watson into taking steps which would have flipped Georgia to him, whereas in fact he was only asking her to do her job, to carry out a proper and thorough investigation, and saying that she would find evidence of dishonesty, but there's no suggestion there of incitement or inducement or illicit pressure or anything. But that full story, which was published by the Washington Post back in December, was confirmed, as they said, by numerous other US news outlets. CNN, ABC News, NBC News, and USA Today, for one, all claimed that they had independently confirmed the Washington Post story. Now, think about that. How could they have confirmed something which wasn't true. Someone clearly was lying. Somebody was spreading a false account of this conversation. And I understand that what happened with this particular recording, the fact that it was lost, was that supposedly it was deleted from Miss Watson, from Frances Watson's device, and was only recovered, as you said, from a trash file after officials, and we don't quite know which officials, but I presume they were Georgia state officials, responded to a Freedom of Information Act request, which revealed the actual quotes and discovered the true recording, and which discovered that the account given was completely untrue. So that suggests to me an actual attempt by someone, I'm not pointing any fingers, by someone firstly to spread a false account about what was said over the course of this conversation, but also to delete the evidence which would have contradicted that account. That's actually really rather disturbing. And given that this conversation happened in Georgia, I have to suppose that it was someone in Georgia who did that. Now, bear in mind that there's all kinds of legal proceedings underway involving Georgia. All kinds of allegations being made by Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, against Donald Trump and vice versa. And there's been talk of legal action. And I wonder whether all of this has come out in connection with that legal action and whether we're going to find out more. But this gives you an idea of what happened. This was intentional. It was intentional on the part of someone. Someone made up a story about things that Donald Trump said to Frances Watson, and someone, probably that same someone, tried to delete the evidence which showed that that account was untrue. Now we see a retraction from the Washington Post. Of course, it's come, as you rightly said, weeks, months after the event itself. The damage has been done, but it further proves that information from anonymous sources, especially when it relates to Donald Trump, is not to be taken seriously. And I'm afraid if you take your news from the Washington Post and all those media outlets which supposedly confirm the Washington Post's recording, CNN, ABC News, NBC News, USA Today, and all the rest, especially if it relates to anything that Donald Trump did or supposedly said, well, we have in England this expression, if you sup with the devil, you need a very long spoon. If you're taking your news from these outlets, you are in effect supping with the devil, because on Donald Trump, they're not reliable about anything they say. So this time, as a result of someone's diligence, they've been caught out. But think how many other things they've said about Donald Trump, which haven't been exposed as untrue, and yet we can be sure that they were untrue.
They do this all the time. A couple of questions for you, which have come to mind. These quotes and these allegations that Trump said this to the Georgia official made their way to the impeachment records. Is that a crime, a federal crime? Because now they're part of a federal document or a federal investigation. In other words, is the lie, is this a bigger crime now because this lie, this fabrication is now, it's a federal document now, the lie. It's made its way into the federal, into government archives, and it was used for an impeachment. That's question number one. Question number two is, okay, so they got one anonymous source, say. Shouldn't all these massive news organizations try to find 3, 4, 5 more sources, or at least an audio recording? And if they can't find that audio recording, at least double check this, triple check this, quadruple check this to make sure they're getting it right. And a story that is that big should should at least one or two of those sources not be anonymous, because you're making incredible claims here. And I understand there may be some people that say, I want to, remain anonymous. But, if you're going to come forward with such claims, I would imagine a massive news organization would have to at least, tell its readers or its viewers, look, we've checked this with one or two anonymous sources, but we also have these records, these documents, or these 2-3 people, and these are their names. And I think of stuff like Hunter Biden's laptop and the fact that you did have a lot of anonymous stuff floating around. But at the end of the day, you had the laptop, you had the computer repair guy, and most importantly, you had a man named Tony Bobulinski who actually went on record, said who he was, did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and gave his side of the story. So, you had a lot of different things to confirm that the Hunter Biden laptop story was true. None of that was done with this and is ever done when dealing with Trump. So those are my two questions. Number two, is this some sort of federal crime now? Because these are on record. This conversation, this fake conversation, supposedly is on record to impeach a president. And then the way these outlets source this stuff is despicable. Unless they're fabricating it, maybe that's a third question. Maybe they're the anonymous source. Maybe the Washington Post is getting a call from Pelosi, and Pelosi is saying, "Look, make up a story about Trump and Georgia. Okay, let's do it. Let's call our friends at the New York Times. Let's call our friends at USA Today. Then let's call Zuckerberg and Dorsey, and they can spread it. And blah blah blah. Anyway, those are my comments.
Right. Let's take those step by step. First of all, is it a federal crime? I don't know, but I think very likely it is. Can I just give an analogy, which is something I am very familiar with? If you bear false witness like this in a criminal case, at least in Britain, you make up a story of this nature, and somebody clearly was lying. I don't think there's any doubt about this. They were clearly providing a false account of this story. If they provided that kind of information, and if it found its way into a impeachment, or at least a criminal case here, then that would be a case of attempting to pervert the course of justice. Now, that would, of course, to some extent depend on exactly what the person who was doing that was intending. And there's always got to be intention. They have to have assumed or thought that there was some kind of legal proceedings underway. But I would have thought that this is certainly an issue which, with an impeachment, of course, is not a criminal trial. Maybe there isn't quite the same law there. Maybe, as I said, the person who made up this story didn't in December anticipate that there would be an impeachment, but it's not impossible that they might have done. I would certainly say that there is enough evidence here to suspect certainly misconduct, possibly criminal misconduct, and to find out who the person who did this thing was, because it seems to me that there is an urgent need for that. And it's quite possible, likely even, that this might be a crime. I can't be sure. I'm just saying that. Now, that's the one thing. Now, coming to the second topic, the second issue, which for me, in some ways, I find that even more important in some ways, because, of course, we have these anonymous sources pouring out this information. We've had it all through the period of Trump's presidency. Anonymous in sources constantly providing information about Donald Trump, which repeatedly, systematically turns out to be true. And the media republishing this information. Now, let's Let's work out how this happened in this particular case. Firstly, it's not something that the Washington Post entirely made up, because a conversation between Donald Trump and Francis Watson did actually take place. So there is some grain of truth to this. Somebody went out of their way to give the Washington Post a false account of that information. That same person who misled, so it would seem, the newspapers, the media, the Washington Post, was presumably also a source for all these other media agencies, CNN, ABC News, NBC News, USA Today, and all the others, which presumably went to that person to confirm that story. Now, that person has acted in total bad faith. That person has completely abused the anonymous protections that he or she obtained and which made them a source. Surely, given what has now happened, we need to know who that person is. Surely, Washington Post, CNN, ABC News, NBC News, USA Today should publicly identify that person who lied to them. If they don't do that, in my opinion, they are colluding with this person, because there is no guarantee that this person, whoever that is, might not lie in the same way again. Now, it's not a case here of protecting a source, because this person wasn't a source. This person is a liar who used the shield of anonymity to spread false information about the President of the United States. So I don't think, ethically, that person should be protected in this way. And I think it is fully in the public interest that we know who they are. Now, if that principle is followed, if it is established that people who provide information like this to the media, if they don't take care and they conceal their identities, and it's subsequently found out that they're lying, that they are at risk of being disclosed, they're exposed to public scrutiny, then this appalling practice of manipulating people by providing this false information to the media in this way, that would very rapidly end. Now, having said all of that, and coming to Tony Bobulinski, as a fundamental principle, one should always prefer the evidence of someone who comes out and gives their evidence openly, makes themselves available to public questioning, appears on television, makes themselves available to the media, answers questions, and makes known who they are. One should always prefer the evidence of that person to a person who provides information anonymously. And yet, the media in the United States over the last 5 years has consistently and systematically done the opposite. When someone like Tony Bobulinski comes up and provides information openly about Hunter and Joe Biden, they're treated as, flaky characters engaged in a Russian disinformation campaign. When somebody gives information about Donald Trump anonymously, that anonymous information is treated as utterly reliable and is republished throughout the media, it circulates freely on Twitter, and of course it's treated as if it's truth. So we have the whole thing in the United States completely upside down, and that of course is being done on purpose, because all of this is being done to serve a particular political agenda. So we have anonymous sources, which by definition are unreliable and which are never held to account for the falsehoods they perpetrate, and which are nonetheless treated as authoritative when what they say corresponds with the political agenda the media and, let's say, the Democratic Party, the Democrats, are following, whereas open sources who come forward and say things in public, identifying themselves and opening themselves up to scrutiny, well, they are not treated as reliable and as honest in that same way, be it Tony Boblinsky, Tara Reid, or whoever.
Yeah, the double standard, and they do it all the time. Anyway, they've lies. That's all I have to say. Lies.
Absolutely. I have to say, this whole business of anonymous sources in the media really has to, we've talked about many things that are wrong with the media space in the United States today. This really needs to be brought an end to, because it is corrupting the news flow. We are not dealing with news. We are dealing with malicious gossip, because that is what this is. This story that we've just dealt with, which we've heard about, it's fake news, it's also malicious, and it's gossip. Somebody has been spreading stories. Donald Trump said so-and-so to Francis Watson as he was trying to take certain steps with the election. That's spread all across the media. That's fake news, malicious, and gossip, and yet it is treated as news. News is becoming polluted by this practice, and it really needs to be brought to an end. Once upon a time, I remember when the media in the United States was reliable. I mean, the New York Times, the old, once upon a time, it used to call itself the paper of record. If they had an anonymous source, they would take enormous steps to make sure that this source was reliable. They would do background checks, they would do due diligence, they would seek to corroborate that person's story. They would often take the very step that you discussed, try to find a person prepared to come forward publicly to corroborate that story. And, if you're dealing with a source who you don't know, I think, by the way, answering your previous question, that ought to be an absolute basic precaution. That ought to be a basic precaution before you republish this sort of thing. And yet all of that has gone out of the window, and we see instead all this nonsense, especially about Donald Trump, being circulated. And let's be absolutely clear about it. It's malicious, and it's pursuing a malicious and even corrupt agenda.
That's what I was going to say. It's not about reporting the news. It's about reporting a narrative, and it's about an agenda. And they did it with Russiagate. They did it with the protests over the summer. They did it 4 years throughout all of Trump's tenure as president. Ukraine-gate, you name it, with the coup and the lockdowns. They do it. It's a never-ending story. It's all about an agenda, and they're not news outlets anymore. They're ordered to report a certain narrative, and the worst part about it is that people believe it.
Oh, absolutely.
And a large proportion of society believes it. And even after this retraction now that the Washington Post is putting out there, it won't get it to the same. It won't get it to the reach of the original article, and it won't change the narrative of do you remember when Trump said this to the Georgia official? Yes. And people will forget that was fake news, and they'll stick with the original story, and that's how it'll be. These retractions are fine, but the damage has already been done, and what they needed accomplished, which was Orange Man bad, they got accomplished. That was the point of all of it.
Absolutely. It comes back to Russiagate. With Russiagate, Russiagate is completely discredited. What you said, that it was a hoax, it was completely not true. That whole narrative of collusion between the Russians and Donald Trump is absolutely phony. There was no part of it that was true. And of course, we're now starting to see the first glimmers of doubts about some of the original stories about the Russian hacking also. That's starting now to sort of crumble at the edges. But the key allegation of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, that was completely untrue. And yet, many people still believe it. And you still read articles which are still asserted as if it might be true. It's quite astonishing, but it's something I discovered long ago, that people will always believe, are always very ready to believe that which they already believe to be true. So there are a lot of people in the United States which for some reason I've never really understood, by the way, want to believe bad things about Donald Trump because for all sorts of reasons they don't like him. So if a story comes along like this one, about Georgia or Russiagate or whatever, however improbable or far-fetched it is, however unlikely it is, however, tainted the sources, and the Washington Post, its reporting on Donald Trump has been, frankly, in my opinion, disgraceful, however tainted it is, nonetheless, they believe it because they want it to be true. And that creates this enormous damage to the political system and to the discourse in the United States, because it then becomes self-reinforcing, because these people who were already predisposed to dislike Donald Trump, they're going to dislike him even more as a result of these stories, not because they are based on any fact, not because they have any actual reasons to dislike Donald Trump, but because they're having their prejudices about him confirmed all the time. That is, by the way, something that happens regularly in totalitarian states. When totalitarian states want to discredit or an opponent, they smear him by churning out stories about them. You saw this very much happen, by the way, in the 1930s in the Soviet Union with the Stalinist trials. They used to spread all kinds of false stories about people, which is intended to, over time, turn people against them. And we see this happening again in the United States. It's why anonymous sources are extremely dangerous as information, as sources of information, and should only be used extremely sparingly and with the greatest precautions. But that's clearly not the case anymore.
And it also happens in reverse. Totalitarian states are very good at hiding the incompetencies of their own government and their own rule, like we're seeing today with Biden, where they basically hide all of Biden's failures. They don't talk about just the southern border, or they reframe the southern border as migrants being housed in luxury dormitories or stuff like that. I mean, they skew everything in the reverse as well. They simply don't report the gaffes. They don't report the real situation as to what's going on, and they fail to inform the people properly. And people should not forget. And my final comment on this is when we're going to have a false flag and they're going to report it so that they can send people, American troops, to die in battle, and so that they can destroy a country like they did in Libya or like they did in Syria. The only thing you can hope is that enough of the population in the United States is going to be cognizant of the lies this time around. They're going to prevent the U.S. from taking action that could result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people based on these types of BS, anonymous source, fake news, propaganda narratives that we know is coming. We know a war is coming. We know a conflict's going to come. We saw it in Syria. We saw it in Libya, which was rubbish as well. Libya was complete fabrication as well. Ukraine, complete fabrication as well. We talked about way back about the Georgia conflict, complete fabrication as well. So, I mean, the only thing that I hope is that, God, when the time comes around and the U.S. is ready to ramp up the war machine, and they're going to base it on, once again, Washington Post and New York Times fake news, that people are aware as to what's going on, and they can somehow prevent it.
Absolutely. Now let's take. Again, you made many points, but let's start with the first one about totalitarian governments concealing the misdeeds and incompetence and negligence of their own governments, which of course the media in their countries do. And there's been a fascinating article, brilliant article actually, by Matt Taibbi, formerly of Rolling Stone, who's now written a piece. He was, of course, for a long time, a journalist in Russia, and he's a collector of old Soviet newspapers, apparently. And he was talking about, the extraordinary parallels between the way in which the old Soviet media used to cover things, cover news in the Soviet Union, and the way some parts of the American press, the media, are behaving now. And he was referring to some of the extraordinary fawning articles there have been about Joe Biden. And specifically, I think one thing he had in mind was Joe Biden's latest TV address to the nation, which he said, some of the commentaries, the greatest speech ever made or something like that, or at least since the Second World War, and how completely overblown that was. And it reminded him, of how, every speech that, Comrade Brezhnev made was, historic and epoch-making, even as Brezhnev stumbled through the speech, just as Biden, sort of quietly went through his. So, the parallels are becoming actually rather painful and rather disturbing. But you're absolutely right. Obviously, a conversation between Donald Trump and an official in Georgia, which has been misreported and distorted in this way. Now, in my opinion, objectively, that story is big news. Let's be very clear. If something like this had happened in the 1950s in the United States, if there'd been, say, a conversation between Eisenhower, who was the president then, and an investigator in Georgia, and the media had given a completely false account about it, and that false account had then been exposed, there would have been an enormous scandal. This would have been big news in the United States at that time, and I think it should be big news today. It isn't big news for two reasons. Firstly, because obviously the people who are involved don't want it to be big news. But secondly, we've become so used to this now that this is now just one instance amongst so many. But big news though that ought to be, lies told in order to encourage a war are far more pernicious and far more dangerous. And as you absolutely rightly say, they've happened before. They happened in Iraq, over the Iraq conflict. There were all kinds of stories circulating in the media, about how, there was WMD in Iraq, and a lot of it was anonymously sourced then. And the same thing happened with Libya, that there were massive atrocities being carried out in Libya, and, Gaddafi was giving Viagra to his troops so that they, could carry out sexual assaults and all sorts of crazy stuff. And it was all complete nonsense. Those sort of lies are far worse than the lie over what the president said to someone in Georgia, serious though that already is. The one thing I will say is, despite the fact that, as I said, the effects of these stories about Trump have undoubtedly done him real damage, one consequence of this constant lying and this constant misuse of anonymous sources is that trust in the media in the United States has crashed. Just as trust in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet media, crashed, the same thing is happening in the United States, with the difference, of course, that the United States is still an open society, still, in many respects, in most respects, in all respects, according to its constitution, a democracy. But people increasingly are stopped believing on many topics what the media tells them. And I think there will come a point, a tipping point, and it may be a war, when if the American people are lied to again and taken to war one more time, on the strength of a lie, you will finally see a major backlash starting to build in response to that. To my mind, the media has already lost a great deal of credibility as a result of the events of the last 5 years with Donald Trump. The last year, by the way, especially. But if they lie to take the United States into a war in which Americans get killed and which the United States suffers bad consequences from, well, I think this time there would be serious consequences, going beyond the fact that just one journalist lost a job from the New York Times after the Iraq war situation. I think there would be a major revulsion of feeling if that were to happen on that same scale all over again. At least that's what I want to believe. But I think if you look at the trust ratings of the media in the United States, you can see that that is so.
All right, we'll leave it there. Alexander Burkhurst, thank you very much. Guys, go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch, pick up a hoodie, pick up a sweatshirt, PayPal, Patreon, subscribe, star, Bitcoin, Ethereum, EMC, Hex, Litecoin, Monero. You'll find all those links down below as well. And Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, look for this channel on those alternative networks, those great video channels. Make sure you're still subscribed to this channel as well. And on your way out, hit that like button. It takes 1.5 seconds to do, and it helps this video out as well. And let's give a quick shout out to Greek Travel Gurus. And they have a special promotion. And you get 10 to 20% off on your travel plans when you use the special code down below in the description box. Just put that code in when you contact Greek Travel Gurus, and it's basically a travel service that will make sure your trip to Greece is the best it can possibly be and zero risk. So whatever happens, you can rest assured that you will not be charged for a trip that you do not take, just in case. In these times, you never know what happens today in this crazy world that we live in when you're making travel plans. So if you are looking to travel this summer to Greece, contact Greek Travel Gurus, and you will have peace of mind to know that whatever does come around this summer, which I hope nothing happens, but you never know, that at least your travel investment will not disappear. They will take care of you, and they have awesome travel plans as well. So get in touch with Greek Travel Gurus. Use the code. Tell them that the Duran sent you, and they will take care of you.
Absolutely, and don't forget also, if you want to support us, Patreon, subscribe, star on PayPal, and as Alex said, we accept donations in Bitcoin and those other currencies. And can I just also say something quickly about Greek Travel Gurus? They, of course, provide you with a bespoke service if you want to come to Greece, an extraordinary country, a very beautiful country, a country that offers a great deal for a visitor. You can go to the sea, you can enjoy the extraordinary landscape. If you want to do a walking holiday, you can have that. If you are interested in classical antiquities and the classical sites, you can do that too. If Byzantine churches and mosaics are what you were in, they can arrange that for you also. So they provide you with protection and security, and they provide you with a bespoke service also. So please check them out, and please also join us for our next program. And thank you very much for joining this one.
Take care, everybody.